Okay, so this is our next set of notes in the genetics unit over other patterns of inheritance. So, what this means is these are going to be exceptions to Mendel's rules, where prior to this, Mendelian genetics um, or our like typical genetics, they're either dominant or recessive. It's either going to be this trait or that trait, and there is no gray in between area. So with these set of notes, these other patterns, there are gray areas. There are where it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that mixed together. So our exceptions are these 7 options. So we have incomplete dominance and codominance, which are going to be done very similarly to our Mendelian genetics that we've already covered with the Punnett squares. Just instead of, again, the traits being one or the other, these are going to show multiple traits at the same time. Multiple alleles, meaning that there are several alleles that code for this one thing. Polygenic traits, meaning that there are, multiple alleles means there's more than 2 options of the alleles. Polygenic traits means that there's multiple genes that code for one trait or one feature. Pleiotropy is when you have multiple traits on one gene. So these two are kind of flip-flop from each other. And then environmental influences and sex-influenced traits. All right, so incomplete dominance. This is going to mean that when you take a dominant parent and you mix it with another dominant parent of a different trait or a different allele type. So in this case, we have 2 homozygous parents. One is homozygous dominant for red flower, the other is homozygous dominant for the white flower. When we mix those together, all of the offspring are pink. So neither R nor W in this example is completely dominant over the other. So that's what we've been studying up to this point is complete dominance. Well, now we're going into incomplete dominance where the R and the W are kind of equal to each other. And so when this happens, the 2 dominant traits, so the red and the white, they mix kind of like paint so that all of the offspring will come out some halfway color or some halfway trait between the 2. Another example of this could be like height. If you're looking at a homozygous dominant tall parent mixing with a homozygous recessive short parent, and then all of the offspring are like a medium height, that is also the same principle. So all of the offspring are that pink color and they're the RW genotype. So this is where we get the 2 different letters coming into play. Codominance, this means that it's going to be both traits, so not like a mixture of them, but it's going to be trait 1 and trait 2, or it's going to be phenotype 1 and phenotype 2. So in this case, this is where both alleles are expressed equally. They are not mixed together the same way that incomplete dominance was, where incomplete dominance kind of mixes like paint. Codominance can be speckled or striped, or a roan cow, which is this kind of white and brown that's speckled or spotted together. So that is an example of codominance. Another example is AB blood type. So if somebody has AB blood, that means they have both the A and B antigens on their blood. So they don't get a third antigen. They don't get like a C antigen. It's A and B put together. And we'll work a little bit with that in class. So and this is our looking at if we take a codominant cross, our genotypic ratios. So this would be if we mix, in this example, you're actually mixing a parent with AB blood and another parent with AB blood. When you do that, again, the same principles apply as with doing our monohybrid crosses. The difference is now we have 2 different letters showing up. And that's why when we started doing complete dominant monohybrid crosses, I told everybody, make sure you use the same letter. So even if you're looking at black and white, whichever one is dominant, give it the capital letter and then give the other one the recessive letter. Well, in this case, both are dominant. So now you can switch the letter because you're using the dominant letter, which in this case is two examples. So when you cross two parents who have like both have AB blood, you have a 1:2:1 ratio of having offspring that are A blood, AB blood, and B blood. Multiple alleles, and again, blood is another example of this because there are more than one allele types in order to choose from. So a typical offspring will still only get two total alleles. They get one from mom and one from dad. But in the grand scheme of the alleles, there's actually three options to choose from. So again, an example of this is blood type. You can choose, so there's the A allele, there's the B allele, but then you can combine them and you get that third allele option, which is AB. And then you actually have another option that has nothing to do with dominance in O blood because O is completely recessive, which is why it has the lowercase letters here. So the three dominant choices are A, AB, and B. And then your one recessive choice or recessive option is O blood, which is completely recessive. There is no antigens on it. And O blood is kind of interesting because O positive is the greatest amount of, it's the biggest blood group in the United States, yet it is a recessive trait. So it is a common recessive trait. Another example of that would be like having 5 fingers. That is actually a recessive trait. So all right, so when we look at blood types, again, this is just kind of examples of multiple things that we're looking at. You have simple dominance. A and B are dominant to O. So O is our recessive trait. You have to have both recessive alleles in order to have O blood. Multiple alleles, and this kind of goes with this bottom bullet point as well, because ABO blood group is you have the allele A, you have the allele B, and then you have the recessive allele O. And then codominance, because when you have A and B together, they're both dominant. So people can end up with blood type AB. And then again, our allele options are A, B, which are both dominant, and then O. We are going to do this problem. Yes, I'll do this problem here on the example screen, and then the next problem we will do in class together. Okay. So it says show the cross between a mother who has type O blood and a father who has type AB blood. So as we're going, so they have O blood, father who has type AB blood. So I've seen this done a couple of different ways. Earlier, a few slides back, there was like using the letter I, which is completely fine because it shows the relationship between AB being dominant and O being recessive. So that's what I'm going to do. We're just going to use the letter I to represent our main alleles. So in this case, I would be mom because she is recessive. And then I'm going to use a capital I with an A attached to it and a capital I with a B attached to it to represent dad. So in this case, we're showing that there is a recessive trait that is possible, but we also have this codominant trait as well. So, all right, so we are going to bring dad's dominant allele over, mom's down, dad's dominant allele over, mom's down, dad's over, mom's down, dad's over, mom's down. All right, so here's our cross between mom and dad. Again, I'm still putting dad's dominant allele first, just because it makes life a little bit easier. There is no foiling that we needed to do here. It is just a simple monohybrid cross. But what makes it a little bit more complicated than what we've been doing is now we have this codominant feature, and we do technically have multiple alleles going on here. We have A, B, and O. So our possible genotypes are capital I with the sub or superscript A, indicating that this is our A allele, and then lowercase I representing that this is our O allele. So that's our one option. And then our second option is going to be the same thing, just with a superscript of B. And then our phenotypes, because the dominant allele is going to overpower the recessive allele, our offspring from this could either have A blood or they could have B blood. Okay. If you are feeling pretty good about this, you are welcome to try the second example problem. Let me get rid of this. There we go. So you are welcome to try this second example problem. It says if a mother has A blood and a father has B blood, can they have a child with O blood? Show your work. So you're welcome to try it. We are going to do this one in class, but if you're wanting to assess yourself and see how you're doing, you are more than welcome to continue with that example problem. All right, polygenic traits. So polygenic traits are really cool because they give the phenotype a spectrum. So an example of this would be human skin color. Human skin color is actually composed of, I believe it's 6 different traits. And in those 6 different traits, the more dominant alleles a person has, the darker their skin color. So, and then the fewer the fewer dominant alleles, so the more recessive they have, the lighter their skin color. Another example of this would be height among humans. Again, that's another if mom is really short and dad is really tall, then offspring would have a greater chance of being somewhat in the middle. But it also depends on how many of each of the alleles they get from mom and dad. So this is also how you can have parents who are, by typical standards, they're considered short, but then they have really tall children, and it's because maybe mom has a couple of dominant alleles and dad has a couple of dominant alleles, and then when they put them together, child has all of the dominant alleles, so they end up being very tall. So in this case, poly means many, genic means genes, so it literally translates to many genes. So this is when your traits, again, they have more than one gene that is coding for them, and it gives that nice spectrum. So again, skin color, eye color is another example. Eye color is actually controlled by 16 different genes, which is why you have such a broad spectrum of eyes. And it's also why you can do eye prints or eye patterns, kind of like somebody could take fingerprints. So everybody's eye pattern, their iris, is completely different than everybody else's. Pleiotropy, this was one of our vocabulary terms. So this is kind of the flip flop where polygenic meant many genes. Pleiotropy means that one gene can code for multiple phenotypes. So an example of this is the SRY gene, which is on the Y chromosome, and it's what determines sex during fetal development. So this is the part of the gene on the Y chromosome that if the organism has the Y chromosome, this is the part that SRY says, okay, these are the things we need to develop. So this one area on the Y chromosome codes for these 3 main traits. So the SRY will cause fetal gonads to produce. So instead of them turning into ovaries as they would with females, they will turn into testes. And it will also cause then, once the gonads or the testes are being produced, it will cause them to start releasing testosterone. And then also once that happens, as the organism or as the child or the offspring, as it grows up, it will also cause hair growth, vocal changes. It will cause the formation of an Adam's apple in humans. It will cause the square shaped jaw. So all of these really more typical masculine features are caused by this SRY gene on the Y chromosome. So if a female, a female bisex organism does not have that Y chromosome, then they don't have any of the genes to code for these three or more traits. All right. Last little bit here is sex influence traits. You do need to add this to your notes packet. There is no section for this in your notes packet, so just make sure you write this down. So there are some autosomal traits that are influenced by sex. So an example of this is male pattern baldness. So the male pattern baldness is dominant in males but recessive in females. This does not take place on the Y chromosome. This takes place elsewhere in the autosomes. So remember, those are our pattern or our matches 1 through 22. So they happen somewhere in the autosomal chromosomes, but it is influenced by sex because it is more dominant in males. So if we assume B is the non-bald allele, if the person is big B, then both sexes will not be bald. So if they have that dominant trait, or excuse me, the homozygous dominant, regardless of their sex, they will not be bald. If they are heterozygous male, they will be bald. But if they are heterozygous female, they will not be bald. Maybe later in life, maybe, but younger in life, they will not be bald. And then if they are little b, if they are both recessive, that means that they will be bald in both sexes at an early age. But the male pattern comes from that because if they're heterozygous and male, there is something in that Y chromosome that influences this trait, but it itself does not cause the trait to occur. All right. And then the last little bit here is genes in the environment. And we've already read a little bit about how organisms can change their sex based off of the environment that they're in and the conditions they're in. We also talked about like Nemo's dad, how technically he should have become female because that was the environment that he was in. So the environment can affect gene expression. What it does is it turns on and off certain genes, and then the gene will code slightly different, or it'll turn on and off different codons so that the gene for hair color will code slightly different. So Siamese cats is an example of this. When a Siamese cat, so this is the one that has the coloration on the face, kind of that darker face and the lighter fur elsewhere. In Siamese cats, when they are exposed to lower temperatures for a pretty good amount of time, not for their whole life, because this can turn on and off, but especially like during winter months, if you have a Siamese cat, you notice that if it goes outside more, that its coloration can start to get darker than during the summer months. So the lower temperatures cause that darkening color because darker colors absorb more light. And so when they are exposed to the sunlight, they can get more warmth into their body. Whereas during the summer months, when it's warmer, the coloration will go more lighter because it is trying to reflect that sunlight off. Okay. Another example of this is hair color in humans. That also is influenced by temperature. That's why hair gets typically darker in the summer, or excuse me, in the winter, and then lighter in the summer. It's does have to do with sunlight exposure as well and the bleaching of the hair. But the roots where the growth happens will also get lighter in the summer. And that is it for our other patterns of inheritance. We will do some more practice problems in class, particularly over codominance and incomplete dominance, but just make sure you have your notes done before you come. Otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I will see you guys in class.